We're live. What's today? Tuesday. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm really excited about this conversation today. This is one of those breweries guys that I want to talk to since Craft Commander was an idea in my head. I have the utmost respect for what's coming out of Crooked Stave and for the gentleman on the other line, Chad Yakobsen. How's it going, Chad?
Good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I'm jealous of your ability to wear a sweater right now. I'm still sweating bullets outside in Miami. And
today was a really warm day. It was like 45 degrees, but the almost foot of snow that we got, it's melting now. It's starting to melt.
I saw you guys were like in the negatives a little while ago.
Yes. Yeah, it was cold. I flew back in this weekend. I was in California. So I went from being at like 65, probably the day I left was 75 degrees in Long Beach, and got into Denver, and it was like -2 degrees. It was
Fun.
a huge.
Yeah, welcome home. Don't feel your face anymore.
Canceled. Yeah.
As a side question, does that affect your guys' brewing operations at all? The temperature dropping so low outside? Like fermentation temps ever get affected by that, or?
We always try and maintain kind of a constant environment inside, but still we see fluxes both in humidity and dryness. It's a little bit more humid, at least in the summer, and definitely more dry around this time of the year. And we don't have much of the ability to control it in the winter. It's harder. It's easier in the summer to make it even more humid. So we see these little fluxes, and all of a sudden we'll see a barrel start leaking or something weird. And we kind of blame it on that. We're like, yeah, there was a bit of a swing in temperature, and that's probably why this started leaking. So really weird things that shouldn't happen but do start to happen.
That's interesting to kind of account for that. But I guess, how do you account for a oops, I guess, or a random barrel leaking? It's a little added challenge, I guess, at this time of the year.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just coincidence that we see these swings, and then all of a sudden we're like, yeah, why did this pick up again? Maybe not, but we associate with it. It's a good excuse for us.
There you go. All right, I want to get back into way back when. For a lot of people who follow, I guess, craft beer, or have followed craft beer, they've at least heard of Crooked Stave. I mean, Crooked Stave is kind of been pushing the envelope. You yourself have been kind of pushing the envelope with research into Brettanomyces and these kinds of fermentations, and it's really interesting. I want to kind of get into your brain at that point in time when you started thinking, I want to learn more about Brettanomyces. I guess even before that, what leads somebody to say, what were you doing? What were you drinking that kind of led you to go, I want to do beer? And I want to not only do beer, but I want to research fermentation. I want to research Brettanomyces. I mean, way back in the day, what was up with that?
For sure. For me, so I always like to kind of start this out with the joke, but honest truth really is that I always call myself a failed doctor. So was studying biomedical sciences. I blame the beer on Colorado, but I really blame the beer the most on Fort Collins. It's really hard to be a college student in Fort Collins and not just be into craft beer. At the time, it was more microbreweries, as they were termed then. Yeah, I remember not even being 21 yet, and kind of already then being, only having craft beer, only having microbreweries, because it was so accessible from how much it costs to drink, for one, at bars and going out, and to be able to get it, and just like how available it was, how everyone talked about it, how everyone was into it. It's as though it's all the same. In fact, I think especially when you're in Fort Collins, it's easier to find craft breweries than it is to find larger breweries. So that was kind of, I blame that aspect definitely on Fort Collins and going to college there. But further back, I've always been very, very, very science-minded. Just kind of, I guess, how I'm hardwired. So, as a young kid, I'm like, oh, being a doctor would be cool. It's probably not that cool. I don't know. But that's what someone who failed at it, would say, right? But for some reason, I did extremely well in plant classes. Arguably, they're harder, and I just it worked for me. I loved it. But being a real also practical person, I knew I wanted to do something to apply the fact that cool, I know botany and horticulture, awesome, So what does that do for you? I really had this idea that what it does for you is you could be a winemaker. So even though it was, beer that I was very into, beer that we drank, it's, what you drink all the time. It's like water in college. It's still like water, I guess. It would wine. And I think it was a little bit still being young, this fanciful idea of being a doctor turns into this fanciful idea of being a winemaker. But that one clicked and worked, and probably had a little bit to do with the microbiology as well. I never realized even then how into fermentation I was. And so it kind of stems from all those things. I talk a lot about being 20 years old and drinking Lafley from New Belgium. So when you ask what were you drinking, I was drinking Lafley.
Yeah.
Pre-game with Lafley before going out to the bars. Cork and caged bottles. I mean, it's ridiculous now to think of. And be like, 20 or 21, no big deal. So that led me down this path. Went and studied winemaking in New Zealand. That was probably where I got introduced to Brettanomyces, at least as something that was visible, present. I remember people talking about Brett and wine, and I was just like, "Who's Brett?" I really was. You know what? Here I was. I'd been drinking Lafley at that point. Would have been for 2-3 years, but I didn't know how sour beers were made, how they were developed. I just knew that I loved the character. Probably why I was into wine and the idea of barrel aging and stuff like that. And that really drove me, the organisms, the barrels, the creativity, everything for it.
Yeah. Now, Brett in the wine world is a completely different animal, right? I mean, they're doing everything they can to stay away from it.
Yep. All research is about how to eliminate, how to reduce it.
So how'd you turn you're dealing with winemaking. How'd you turn this thought process of this is an evil thing into, was it you realized, oh shit, this is what's in beers like Lafley, and this is what's adding these kinds of funky characters to this beer? And
it actually was really later on. So I mean, I knew in wine that it was bad, but I didn't know that it was what I liked in these different beers. So studied wine, continued to travel for a while. Spent almost 3 years kind of living abroad and traveling. Part of that included the master's research and the master's work that I then went and did. And it kind of came about. Even while traveling in Asia and different places, this will sound ridiculous. South America even. Every once in a while, I'd come upon sour beer, and I'd be like, "This is delicious. This is awesome." That was properly infected beer, actually. It was probably made on poorly equipment. Because even so, as well as traveled around Southeast Asia, traveled around South America, spent all this time in these different countries, and the friends who I met and did it, everywhere we went, we searched out the new beer. In South America, every town you get into has a new beer. Most of it I think falls under the category of Latin American lager.
Sure.
I think that's the one that one of the breweries in Bolivia always wins, and you can find a ton of them. But also a lot of stouts. Huh. They even have fermented beverage, Pony Malta, for instance, in Colombia. It's all a dark malt-based drink that kids drink growing up for energy. Mm-hmm. It's just not fermented beer. It's wort. It's packaged. So the dark drinks as well, the stouts, the porters that you find. But you could find a lot of German expats too. Mm. So beer, I was always so into beer that eventually I really just realized after I'd done the postgraduate studies in wine that it was beer that I was more interested in. It was beer that could be more creative. It was beer that would allow me to kind of show off an artistic side. Being so science-driven, science-minded, there's also another side to me that I kind of want to be able to expose, and that's Crooked Stave. So everything we do now is just so much attention to detail. We have the lab. We have all these things built out at Crooked Stave to be able to look at every aspect of what we're doing and be able to apply the research that I did, the master's degree in brewing and distilling. But yet it's still art at the end of the day that we make. There's so much that goes into it.
Sure.
Yeah, it was just this path along the way that eventually, also I lived and did wine in London. So for 6 months, kind of worked as a sommelier. And it was there almost every day after we would do the wine tastings. I called it Disneyland of wine where we were, because people were coming in and you were kind of doing tastings and stuff, how to taste wine, all these different courses. We would go across the street to the Rake. It was like the only beer bar they had in London back in the time. It was a really like craft beer bar. And I would just drink lambic at Goose every single day. It's, 375 ml bottles would be 3-4 pounds. So
Right.
you didn't think anything about it. A pint of Guinness would cost you more than that. So you're like, yeah, I'll drink this here for the cost, for what it is. And eventually, when I knew I was going to go and do the master's studies, I still didn't know yet what made beer sour, because there weren't a lot of people who talked about it. I realized that it was easy to find out, Lactobacillus, Brettanomyces, but I wanted to know scientifically about these organisms, and I really couldn't find a lot. So it was really then, more in London afterwards, that I realized, okay, this is what makes beer sour. Wow, this is the same thing that winemakers rebel against. So naturally, I would take everyone who was in London at the time was like Italian winemakers, people from New Zealand, Australia, France, this big conglomerate of all of us from around the world who all like kind of found ourselves in the UK at the time, in London, but we all worked in wine. And I had other friends, actually some of them now have switched from winemakers, work for distilleries in Norway and different places. We would drink all these different sour beers. Even Oz Clarke, one of the times after Oz Clarke's quite a famous name in wine, after one of his presentations where I worked, we all went to the Rake and we're drinking Flemish Reds and just talking beer and everything back in the day. And yeah, so here are these wine people, and here we are drinking sour beer.
Yeah.
Made sense to me. I wanted to know more about it.
It seems like to me, like it's pretty natural transition from wine into sour beer. I mean, you get a lot of wine-like character in a lot of sour beers. And so it's an easier transition sometimes with people that say, no, I don't like beer, I only drink wine, to kind of hand them something, even like maybe one of your fruited beers, maybe like, with something with blueberries or something kind of more softer flavors, and kind of transition them in with sour beer. It kind of makes sense. But what a cool group of people to be kind of grooming your palate or your mind with as you go into this kind of research project. Around what year would you say we're at right now, where you're in London kind of thinking about all this?
2007.
So right around that time, I guess oh my God, it's a long time ago already. Jeez. Okay, so I guess you're in London 2007, and then you realize you had this kind of epiphany that I want to know more about what's going on in sour beer. And I guess at that point in time, did you ever imagine that it would lead to Crooked Stave of today, or was it more just kind of like your science aspect, the science aspect of your character, kind of saying, I want to know, continue to enjoy this stuff.
That was at the really early stages. So I remember living in London. I remember having like some late nights out and waking up in the morning and having these ideas, like, because I really wanted to be a winemaker, and I really like the idea of having a really small plot of land and making wine. It's probably still going to happen. I still have those hopes and aspirations. But instead being like, no, I'm going to study brewing, go back to Colorado, be able to start a brewery. One of the things that was really fascinating about brewing is this is tried and true now and very obvious, but you can start a brewery anywhere in the world, because anywhere in the world, you're able to get a hold of the malts, the grains, the hops, your yeast, everything like that. You're able to be creative, less boxes that you get put in and defined by. It exists. It's always going to be there, but very different for wine, and especially the wine that I was interested in wanting to make. Now more and more, you can do similar things with wine, but it's maybe a little more frowned upon in wine, or less taken less serious. Whereas in brewing, it doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. If you're doing it right, if you're really, got attention to detail, it'll show and people will take notice. So I think that aspect kind of led me. So it was there, in 2007, we're in fall of 2007, and I started realizing more of that. So that was when I applied to Heriot Watt, which is in Edinburgh, Scotland, and they've got Masters of Science that you can do in brewing and distilling. And I really wanted to have the fancy piece of paper say, like, specifically brewing science. That was important to me. So I took another year off and went and traveled South America, and then went to Harriet Watt.
There you go. Nowadays, would you recommend? I mean, for somebody who is looking to be a brewer, I mean, nowadays with the growth and the amount of people trying to get into the industry, I mean, it's probably wise for more people to take your lead and go that route, getting that degree,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's
Fortunately, there's a lot more. Absolutely, and I can say this from the aspect of the employees who we're hiring and continue to hire. More and more of our employees are at a university currently studying brewing science and coming on, or doing night classes at the universities and being able to do it, or taking them afterwards, or doing more courses. So some aspect to that is definitely going a long ways.
Sure.
And you just getting your foot in the door.
Yeah. So we're starting this master's program. I kind of keep going back and forth, but a master's is what, 2 years?
In all for Australia, New Zealand, the UK, it's 1 year.
Okay.
Less of the rigorous role that we take sort of in the US, where sometimes it's all research, or it's a year of this and a year of research. They're much more practical based. So it's when I broke it down, it's kind of a third of chemical engineering, a third of biochemistry, and a third microbiology, and kind of all that being mixed together with your different courses. So my courses were called, fermentation science. You have ones on packaging science. So everything around like how what type of cardboard you choose when you're choosing a box, and what the corrugation's like, and how thick it is, and what the weight, how it is. And then like printing technology. I mean, everything you could ever think of, everything about cans, everything about bottling.
Wow.
Production management for just-in-time courses, all sorts of stuff like that. So it's a 1 year intensive course on all the practical aspects of brewing theory, brewing science. And then usually it's a shorter 3 to 6 month research project. And the research project is the one where I created the Brettanomyces project.
That's it. What's the I guess just for people's benefit, what's the website? I mean, I know I've been to a billion times.
It is the brettanomycesproject.com.
Okay. And everything's, I mean, all the info's there. The issue for some people may be that you are on a high level, my friend. I mean, you're in the weeds on this. But I've also listened to a lot of presentations you've given. I mean, look at me, I sound like a stalker. And you got a really great way of distilling it down. And I hope that maybe we can get into a little bit of that. I know there's some people that were looking forward to hearing some of the brewing science in a little bit, but Brettanomyces is a beautiful thing. Personally, I brew with it. I ferment a lot of my beers on Brett, and I figured out who he was. Not to the extent you do, but I figured out who Brett was. But I mean, so you were drinking La Folie while you were in Fort Collins and Denver, and I'm thinking at the time Crooked Stave started, there wasn't a lot of breweries, maybe skipping forward a little bit too much, that were really focusing on, we're doing 100% Brett or mixed fermentation beers, which you guys did.
No, I mean, at the time, so the Crooked Stave is, I think, first and foremost, is really an extension of the research, but also the direction that I wanted to go with it. So in the research, I didn't do anything with barrel aging and sour beer per se. It was all about 100% Brettanomyces fermentations. Mm-hmm. But how you apply that to the sour beers you make is kind of everything. So Crooked Stave, the name even, the focus talks about the fact that, the stave and being different, it's the focal point. It's the heart of our brewery. At the time, there was only one other full-on barrel-aged brewery, and that was Jolly Pumpkin. Mm-hmm. Ourselves and Anchorage. Literally, we announced our breweries within weeks of each other. We started at the exact same time. So you went from having Jolly Pumpkin for Ron had been going for a few years there, and he was the only person using foeders and barrels for 100% of his production.
Right.
And then on to Gabe and I, the next two, who were then doing 100% of our production in foeders and barrels. And at Crooked Stave, we were doing more and more primary fermentations as well with Brettanomyces. And the idea was to see whether the research that I did for the masters was worth anything.
Sure.
You know, it's great. Sometimes the research that you do takes you so far down a hole that you really specialize in this one little thing and you know it very well. But what's the bigger picture? And so Crooked Stave was also about looking at the bigger picture, looking at Brettanomyces primary fermentations, looking at Brettanomyces yeast, looking at everything that it's capable of. So that was really the start for it. And, you know, off the top of my head, there's about 5 breweries who had made 100% Brettanomyces beers and who were really even doing it. I mean, you know, if you remove some of the Flemish Reds from Belgium, you know, and Cantillon and Driefontein and Lambic brewers from Belgium, and Orval, you know, Orval being probably the most iconic of beers that use Brettanomyces in it, being a Trappist brewery, you bring it down to the U.S., you know, you had Russian River, Lost Abbey. You had New Belgium with a very notable sour program, you know, in the fooders. For me, it's still breathtaking to see their foeder cellars, see everything they have. For them, it's, you know, a niche part of their production. They have so much more that they do, but still very admirable what they did, and definitely mentors and leaders at the time for me. And yeah, so Russian River, Lost Abbey, New Belgium, Avery. You had Jeff O'Neill, who was up at Ithaca at the time. He'd done a 100% Brettanomyces beer too.
Not much.
No.
That's the point I was getting at. It's got to be. I mean, it had to be a kind of scary thing to jump into this project, right? And you still call it a project, right? I mean,
and we maintain that aspect to it. Definitely. You know, I think it helped during the master's research. I did 130 fermentations with Brettanomyces, so I had a decent idea of what I was doing. And right before I started Crooked Stave, I worked for Odell Brewing Company in Fort Collins for a year. Super solid brewery. They were at least 20 years old at the time. So, I mean, they'd been through it, seen it. So I really had a chance to see brewing and see quality brewing at a very high level and be a part of that production. So that combined with the research and the knowledge of Brett really gave me the ability to say, like, this is going to happen, you know? And also it's about, everyone says it's about who you know. You know, I was fortunate to spend the time with friends from New Belgium, to see about fooders, to see blending, to understand that process, to talk to them about what they did with Brettanomyces in their lab and Lactobacillus, Vinny at Russian River, Tommy at Lost Abbey. So some of these people who were, you know, I bet across the country there were probably about 20 breweries at the time, maybe as much as 50, dabbling in Brettanomyces beers and doing that. And a good amount of them, because of the Brettanomyces project, we had a connection. And I was able to bounce questions off them, and I was able to fill them in on things that they were seeing happening as well. So getting that aspect in there was like, okay, well, I think the most frightening part is actually realizing that you know more about something than anybody else, and you can't ask someone, like, what is going to happen.
Sure.
The person who would always remind me of that would be Troy Casey. At the time, he was at AC Golden. Now he's got Casey Brewing and Blending. And I would start asking him, okay, well, I'm seeing this and this is happening, and be like, well, I don't know, Chad. You tell me. You're the person who studied this.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. Okay.
Troy's another superstar doing some really cool stuff. Yeah, I love what Troy's doing. Troy's got a cheat code too. His dad knows a thing or two about yeast as well. I mean, it's not, you know, just a tiny bit.
Greg is the man.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, Greg.
It's a really good friend to have. You know, he was there from the beginning as well. We met when I was back at Odell. So the two of us have been really close friends since. We traveled a lot, to a lot of conferences, spoke together, all sorts of stuff. So still a close friend, confidant. We bounce a lot of things off each other. So probably unfair to have the two of us so close together.
That's awesome. What about just like the market? You know, like you're saying, there's 20 to 50 breweries brewing with Brettanomyces. I mean, just putting a Brett beer in their portfolio. There is one guy doing it exclusively, and now you and Anchorage are going into this thing full steam ahead. There had to be a heavy amount of anxiety just about, is the market going to take enough to these types of beers?
So that's the other part to Crooked Stave as well, actually, was I wanted to see, can you do it, you know, on a production scale? Can you make it reliable? Is it something that is doable? But the other thing is, do people want to buy this? Even back then, we're talking about now 7 years ago. And yeah, a one-off, sure. Of course people are going to show up and buy a one-off. Do people want to drink this all the time? Is there a market for this? We know there's a market for IPA. We know there's a market for these different type of beers, but is there a market for a Brettanomyces beer? Because what is a Brettanomyces beer?
Right.
When I say Pilsner, you know what that is.
Sure.
When I say Porter or Stout, you've got an idea what that is. Imagine 7 years ago when you said to someone a Brettanomyces beer, they're like, what?
Yeah, exactly. That's
It's not a style in and of itself. It's a family. To me, it's an entire third category of beer that I call wild.
Right.
Ale, lagers, and wild. Brettanomyces falls in that. There's so many things you can do with it. So what is that is to each their own. I think, again, it's part of what drew me into brewing in the first place from wine was that creativity, the ability that you have to think this through. You have to be able to do this, and you need to be creative from a marketing standpoint, from a sales standpoint, and especially as a brewer using ingredients. That's what the Wild Wild Brett was. It was a chance to ask, what is a Brettanomyces beer, and do people want to drink this?
Yeah, it's awesome. And I kind of see like a theme going here a little bit. I mean, winemaking is probably one of the most romantic things you can do artistically in the culinary, especially like the culinary world. And I always view the production of these kind of wild / sour. I mean, different people categorize it differently. I always call it wild also. These wild beers is extremely romantic too, especially with the use of oak, fruit, even without fruit. You can push it, you can push the temperatures, you can do so much to it. It's kind of that same romantic, while you're not figuring out how much you're going to water the soil this year or whether you're going to water it at all, or, you're determining how you're going to treat the little organisms that are at work. And really doing a lot of, stressing them out a lot. It could be just as romantic as an idea. And it's funny to hear you continually call it art, because I talked to some other brewers that don't have necessarily a wild program, and they see it more as a production, right? I mean, we brew a great IPA, and it is a production. It's an I know where the outcome is. I know 1, 2, 3, 4, and I get there.
Yep. Dot your I's, cross your T's.
Yeah. Where this is, I think I'm going to get to this point. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get to this point, but there's a lot more romance around the idea of getting there, right? I mean, is that kind of the way you see it too? You're the art team, I guess.
Absolutely, and that's what keeps me going every single day in doing it, and it's also what creates the excitement. Why it's always ever changing and different, but it's also draws together my two backgrounds. So, having studied winemaking, having visited so many wineries, it was part of the courses there, you can't help but draw inspiration from what you see. And if so much of what I saw was being at wineries and seeing that, it paints a picture of how I want our brewery to look, how I want it to operate, how I want our beers to taste, and flavors start to meld. I mean, it's no different. I draw inspiration from the culinary world as well when it comes to ingredients and stuff. And you think about French cuisine and process and how it's driven. Brewing's like that as well. But at the end of the day, how does it taste? What do you make? And so chefs kind of come off as artists as well because of that. And that's this aspect in brewing where you're more a chef, you're more an artist than you are just a bread baker. And same thing. Like, it's very comparable. There's a romance in being the chef, especially what's happened in the culinary world. There's a romance in being a winemaker. There is a romance in being a brewer for sure as well. No one realizes that you're really a janitor, not a brewer. Right. But at the same time, a chef versus a baker. There's a lot of romance in being in the chef. And so this aspect of brewing and blending and all that really brings the romantic side of brewing out. So it just ties it together. Is there
a beer that that you've brewed so far, and maybe not, you might be seeking your own holy grail, but is there a beer that you've brewed so far that you cracked the bottle, even if it wasn't right when you released it, but maybe you went back to it a year or two later and said, this is what I'm trying to hit. This is that art form I've sought out to hit this, and this did it. Is there any of those beers that stick out in your mind right now if you sit here?
There's a couple, but sometimes they mean different things. Sure. Sometimes it's about having an idea of how you want something to taste. And given the way we produce beers, it's extremely difficult because of the organisms that we use. So sometimes it's about a beer you wouldn't even think that's like, oh my God, because this is what we're looking for, this is a home run. Yet someone else might try it and be like, cool, but they don't know all of the background, everything goes into it. I mean, in the most idealistic of ways, yeah, the first Persica that we ever released in 750 mils, I mean, that beer is just phenomenal. And it was really quickly, and it continues to be. It's crazy to open a bottle now and be like, how does it still have this much peach flavor and all this character? You know, and that's based on the peaches from that year and our process and all that. So you're always trying to see each year, did we get to this again? Did we get there? A beer motif that we brew, it's inspired by another Belgian beer. And the brewery used to have, like many other breweries, used to use Rodenbach's culture. So I'm producing a beer that hasn't been brewed since the 90s, or I'm producing the idea of a beer that hasn't been brewed since the 90s, yet I know what the beer tastes like now, which is very different. So we're trying to blend these two together, and you're talking to, you know, people from Belgium from the 1990s trying to pick their brain about what it tastes like. And so we've brewed motif three different years. Last year's batch is just like mind-blowing. I taste it now, and everyone who's there who tastes it is just like, this does not taste like Crooked Stave. This tastes like a Belgian beer. I mean, it's got those dates, prunes, raisins, you know, that oxidation character that comes from it. A tart cherry note, though, because a little bit of bacteria. But when you smell it, it doesn't smell like Crooked Stave. It doesn't smell like a sour beer. It smells Belgian, like a big 9% Belgian double, you know, brown. And then you have this year's, and this year's phenomenal. Arguably, probably more people will like it because it's a little more tart, a little more sour right off the bat.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, they're all great. But that one last year, you're just like, oh my God, this is the way it's supposed to. This is the way it tastes in my head. This is the way it actually tastes. It's so hard with IBUs, the fact that it's all mixed culture. So all the bacteria, all the Brett, all the sac is there from the beginning. So to try and create a beer that tastes Belgian, yet there's Brettanomyces and bacteria and all this stuff in it, it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Except for under certain conditions. So those weird things. Most people are like, motif? Really? Which beer called motif? So weird.
It's really cool that you can think of those right off the top of your head. I asked you a question and you got, you know, those two, I think you said three beers just boom. I mean, that's such a cool thing. You're so intimately connected with the product. I mean, it's like it's a labor of love. So you experiment a lot at Crooked Stave. I mean, it's still a project, right? I mean, we're still learning, and we're still expanding what these cultures, this yeast can do when you put it in different scenarios. Is there any experiments that you've done, or beers that you've put out that you go, you know, maybe you didn't like, but everybody else in the brewery was like, this is awesome, or anything you said, maybe you know, that maybe that's part one, and part two is anything that you came up with that you said this is going to be perfect. All along the way, you're like, this is going to be great, and then all of a sudden it was just, whoa, what happened there? And you learn from.
Yeah, it does, and you get tired of things sometimes too. Something's good for a while, and then you're like, yeah, I'm kind of tired of it. We're in the process, you know, similar but different. We're in the process of playing around with yeasts on the mixed culture for some of the beers. You know, we've always used for the different saisons. We've always used, well, no, I can't say we've always used because I've probably used 5 or 6 different types of blends. But now I'm in a process which is a lot more radical than any of the other ones. I mean, we're essentially using a yeast to make Belgian beer that's not Belgian. So that's got its nuances. But you get tired of tasting the way it's always tasting, even though no one will ever notice the difference in the flavor. You know, if we're putting out stuff. Just I do in the base beers and those things, but in the end, it always tastes like Surette. It's always going to. Do Surettes taste different? Yeah, certainly between batches, but Surette always tastes like Surette.
Sure.
And these are going well. We did it with Hop Savant. I played around with processes for Hop Savant so many times, always tweaking, always finding the best way to get the hops to shine through, you know, get the best of the Brett characteristics, limit other characteristics. So we played around with this one and just tastes like tastes like Hopsvant. Doesn't matter whether it's 100% Brett or Saison and Brett strains or English ale yeast and Brett. It tastes like Hopsvant. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
So
I love
those are
Hopsvant.
you definitely have, at a festival when someone's like, well, which one's your favorite? You always say like, why would you make me pick between my children? Or like, I don't have favorites. But you do. You definitely have favorites. So that's hard to say. I think one that's kind of an example of beer that is, it's not that we'll never do it again, but we're not actively brewing it anymore. We have it because we brew enough. We like to age it and release it after periods of time because it just continues to change, is Progenitor.
Mm.
We had a beer that was a dry hopped sour. But the thing is so it's produced similar to the Petite Sours, where primary fermentation, all in oak foeder with all the mixed culture, that acidity, that character comes on quick, very complex. Then we move it into a stainless tank, give it more time. The stainless tank's really just so we can dry hop it. We dry hop it, get off the hops, package it, and let it condition. It's a wonderful beer. But now we have enough golden sour base that I can make a dry hop sour, like Libretta dry hop, with 12-month-old golden sour beer. So when I take the beer that's a little bit younger and primary fermented foeder, or I take the beer that's really complex and aged and has all the characteristics of our golden sour and dry hop it, well, the 12-month aged one with the hops is just better. And so I can't release two beers and be like, I like this one better.
Sure.
So we just kind of gotten rid of Progenitor. I mean, still have labels for it. I'm sure a time's going to come when we have a batch and I'm like, let's dry hop this. Let's release Progenitor. I'm sure it'll happen. But it's just, I can make Libretta dry hop. And even I did a tasting with so I also own a distribution company in Colorado. So we have Crooked Stave Artisans and bring in a lot of breweries from around the U.S. We also distribute Shelton Brothers, 12%. So a really big portfolio. And wine and spirits and kombucha and pickles. And it's awesome. Hot sauces. Coffee.
Anything fermented.
Yes. And yeah, because even coffee, those beans are fermented. So I'm like trying to think now, what do we have that's not fermented in the lineup? Must be something. But yeah, so I do trainings with our reps at CSA. And so we were in the tap room doing sensory training, and we poured the sour IPA and said, okay, everyone, which beer is this? Not knowing, like having not actually seen, like, and smelling myself. Everyone's like, this is Libretta apricot. No. Is this Persica? I'm like, well, Persica's not up on the board, so no. Surrey with peaches? They're just sure. Every single one, 100%. No one even came close to guessing it. To the point where, like, I had to go and ask our taproom manager, like, pour the right beer, right? Sour IPA. After this time now, in bottles, it's Libretta dry hop. After this time, it tastes like there's apricots in the beer. So fruity and floral, and just so nice and beautiful. So that one as well is like awesome to go back to. And the point is that all of our reps hadn't tried it in a while. It's probably 6 months old at this point. They wrote it as, hey, it tastes like this. Tasted 6 months later, they all think there's apricot fruit in it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you're one of those breweries, and I don't do this with a lot of breweries, but you're one of those breweries where if I see the bottle on the shelf, if I'm at the store and I see multiples, I will always pick up 2 or 3 because I want to see what it's like right when it hits the shelf, and then I want to see what it's like a year from now, because I feel like the beers you guys are producing are those kinds of beers that will age well and age to create really unique flavors that, it's one thing to pick up a sour beer and think, oh, this is sour, it'll age well. That's not necessarily true. But there's something, maybe you can tell us, there's something about your beers that they just develop this beautiful complexity over time. And I love it. If you look through my kind of shelves of beer, you can pretty much assure yourself, if you see a bottle of Crooked Stave, there will be maybe 2 more of the same batch somewhere else in there.
I definitely recommend that. Just because we have such a storage. So now we're almost 6 years old. On January 10th, it will have been 6 years since I brewed the first batch. I still have bottles of that. We have bottles of everything. And, we always said in the beginning, we knew things were going to age well. But how well? 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 6 years. We're watching things that were released that are still doing just phenomenal. we go to great lengths to kind of retain that process and to look into what it is that we believe is kind of doing that, talking to other brewers, especially lambic brewers, because they talk about how long it can last and all of
25
that.
years. And
Yeah. And so it's important, and we recommend picking up multiple bottles the same way you would with wine. Wine has a culture where you buy a case of something.
right.
You buy 6 bottles of it, but in general, you buy a case of wine. And you do that because you're going to drink it over time and taste it and have it for a while and age it. It's part of the culture. It's part of the culture of wine. Also, I mean, wine doesn't probably sell the volumes that beer does. So it's a whole different mentality, when you think about the way you drink beer and the volumes that you drink of it. So getting people to think that way is not first nature necessarily.
Right.
We've just seen it. There's a lot of regular brewing practices that go into ensuring that. Cutting down on oxygen, seeing whether the beers are bottle conditioned, seeing the way you age them. A lot about our process in the cellar. Anyone who comes into Crooked Stave is usually instantly blown away by how clean our brewery is. Number one comment: this brewery is so clean. I can't believe it. That's inside and out. We take our barrels apart. When we get them in, taking them apart, we're re-scraping them out. We're breaking out. We call them blisters, little blisters that are inside. They often hide wine and other bacteria. We know our barrels in and out. We know our foeders inside and out. They're so clean. They get cleaned off. And we really maintain our culture. I mean, now maintaining cultures of Brettanomyces and keeping them alive is something that I've been doing for some of ours are 8, 9 years old.
Wow.
That we're using. You have a really intimate relationship with those. And it's not the ones that have died and then we reorder from a lab. It's like, yeah, these are still going because they have been.
That's amazing.
Refining your process, always keeping your barrels topped up, just being, attention to detail. It's the number one word that we talk about at Crooked Stave. And that attention to detail is what really shows in the beers. It shows in the way fruits shine through and the flavors that are created, but also in the way that they continue to age, because they got that attention to detail all the way through, and therefore they're going to continue to shine in the bottle. Putting a beer in the bottle this is really different than actually what breweries normal say. So the saying in beer, the saying in brewing is that packaging, the only thing you can do is fuck a beer up. So sorry for the language, but you can't make it any better.
Right.
Every time you transfer a beer, you're just having oxygen ingress, you're decreasing shelf life, the beer is changing, and not for the better. Mm-hmm. So packaging in general is not recognized as a process where you can make the beer any better. On the other hand, when we put beer in a barrel, it only gets better. We have to choose the point. One of the hardest things to develop has been choosing the point of when to put beer into the bottle. Because if we wait longer, it just gets better. But I can't wait forever. Can't wait beers in the barrel for 5 years before we decide to package them, because then they won't. The bottle at the same point is void of oxygen, void of sunlight, void of anything that's going to really, and instead it's a smaller surface area where the beers can be able to condition and age and grow in complexity. Attention to detail comes down to the Brettanomyces strains that we've collected and used. We see a very long life of those strains and their flavor development. So 6 months in, you're still getting more flavor development in a bottle. And all those things, it's not any one thing, it's kind of everything combined that I know is leading towards that.
That's awesome. I mean, and it's true, what you were saying about the case mentality, right, with the wine versus beer. And I think it's sometimes a shame too that people are so they may buy a case of Crooked Stave, that a limited release case Crooked Stave, and they will trade it all except for one bottle. We have this the trading mentality in beer is something it's crazy. How do we break that? Is there any way to break? Have you given that any thought? I mean, I know most brewers. You talk to Kate Troy, you talk to Corey over at Side Project, and Jeff at Jester. They want people to enjoy their beer, And okay, you can do whatever you want with it once you buy it, but there's this thing like, hey, why not? Why not enjoy this thing?
Yeah, it's difficult. I think because people get, why? Because of Pokemon.
Gotta catch them all.
Gotta catch them all. People get more caught up in that than the actual enjoyment of what they have. So to them, the enjoyment is collecting them all and not actually tasting them and how they taste. And then when they do, they have such wacky expectations that they either lie and say it's delicious when it's mediocre. That's something that's been going on in beer for 6-7 years. People have been calling it out from the beginning.
Right.
I remember this with Cigar City, within their first year and different things. It's where the term Homer came from. Probably a lot of people who trade beer now don't even know where all these terms came from and when these were created and what area and where they came from and stuff. So you get around it long enough and you realize there's a lot missing from how things used to be. Yeah, I don't know how you get away from it. We have a really weird situation where people view us as being too big and making too much beer, and they really have no clue how small are the volumes that we make. But we just look larger than elsewhere. So if you make too much beer, then it's not rare and it doesn't taste as good. So
that's obviously the case.
Clearly.
We should tell Corey to stop the expansion over at Side Project because now people aren't going to want his beer anymore.
Oh my God, he's going to make more than 300 barrels next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Not good.
He told me 250 barrels last year. I can't. Yeah. It's not
under 300. Yeah, and so it's all relative for how little it is. I like to use Hunapoo's as an example. I mean, Cigar City, Hunapoo's is like 50% of the beer we brew or something, for the volume. Like they can make sales out in one day, gone, can't get enough.
Right.
And then I sit here like, but wait a minute, people think we make too much beer. Whatever.
It's incredible.
And at the same time, too, though, my goal is to make the highest quality sour beers and the things we can do. Yeah. I mean, I can't name, outside of a couple of friends and really that, another brewery who everything they do is whole fruit.
Right.
So being able to use whole fruit, getting that from Colorado, a little bit that comes from Washington, which is like 30 minutes from where my wife's family is as well. And the growers there love our beer. It's awesome. They're breeders. They work with the same breeder who breeds all the New Zealand hops. So that guy is the same breeder who bred the raspberry that we use and stuff. We'll do like 80,000 pounds of whole fruit this year, almost like 40 tons. So it's crazy, like the way we go out and doing it and to be able to use that. And I like the idea of being able to, I know for trading purposes, it's not a good thing, but I like the idea that the beer could be accessible and that people could be able to have it. I like turning people on to sour beer. We like making these available. We understand that people like beer rare as well. But, it's like if we make enough beer so that people in Florida or Vermont, or Washington can get it, then at home it's not wanted anymore. It's a crazy paradigm. So basically you just have to satisfy both sides. People want something to trade, something to be excited about. They want a new Pokemon, or a new Pog or a new baseball card, whatever it is that we've been trading all our lives. And then there's a lot of other people out there who just want to drink beer.
Yeah. I'm ecstatic. I mean, I used to have to, trade the rights to, my first child away to get a bottle of Crooked Stave in Florida. And now I can go to the Total Wine down the street and it's there. I love it. And
that's a success.
It's the best. Thank you. I'm turning a lot of my friends onto sour beer too, wild beer.
So you couldn't do that though. You would never be able to introduce them to Crooked Stave if we couldn't make a little bit of beer to be able to sell. If you told them, how do you get this? Well,
yeah.
So let me tell you about the trading community now.
Yeah.
And what do you have? You're going to need to go and get this to collect this and do it. Like it's
right.
Maybe romantic. I'm not sure.
No, it's annoying. But it's not. I love that I can just point people and go, you see down the aisle over there on the left. You want sour beer? There's Crooked Stave. Grab a bottle.
It's our goal to be known as highest quality sour beers and to have them be available so that it's not like trading away your life to be able to get it. Instead, it's something that's accessible and you can enjoy it. So tonight when you make dinner, open up a 750 ml bottle of Crooked Stave, which there'll be soon. Or some 75s to be able to enjoy by yourself. Like we create beer for people to be able to enjoy and to be able to drink it. So
well, if you need quality control for those 750s, I mean, there's guys in Miami that are willing to do that for you. So are we? So I mean, I know you're keeping multiple cultures at the brewery, right? I mean, how many cultures are you up to now for the portfolio you guys are putting out? Do you have a count on?
It's actually not. It's not that many because I haven't gotten to do a lot of research since my research. Everything's been very practical based, brewing based. So I think I still just have like 10 in my collection. And with that we use at Crooked Stave is really just a few. So not as many. We really like the flavors from a couple. With the build out of our lab and everything we're getting up and going, I think we'll have more chances to start going back. I have wines that have Brettanomyces in them and different things. So be able to go back again and start collecting again and see where that leads to.
Is there
less Brettanomyces culturing currently than you would think?
Yeah,
lots of.
It's gotta be for someone that's so detail oriented. It's gotta be psychosis to make sure all these things stay compartmentalized where they're supposed to be. But is there some of the people that spoke to me before that I was going to be chatting with you that are brewers, there's always this kind of like keeping a house culture or keeping a culture alive. And you were talking about it a little earlier, and I got to ask that question. I forgot about it, but keeping the culture alive for 8 years, or is there like a top 3 things to do that you would recommend people do if they're keeping a home brewery culture alive? They found this one beer they brewed, they really want to pull the dregs off it. It came out exactly how they want it. They want to keep that guy going. I mean, is there a quick
keep using it?
Yeah, is there like a quick ABC?
Liquid.
That what?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of always keeping things acclimated. So I'm not a big fan of I'm going to make a little bit of say, especially if you're at home, but even in the lab setting, I wouldn't make like, using malt extract or even using wort that's not hopped. I would use it in the beer that you're looking to use it in. Now, if it's bacteria and acidity, I wouldn't use a 40 IBU beer for it. Stick around 10, 15 IBUs. But keeping it acclimated, keeping it alive, keeping in the product that you use it in, and being able to store it that way works really, really well. So if it's even just pulling off some of the beer from now, not the dregs though, mind you. I like actually the live beer pretty much that does it. But if you're pulling dregs like from a barrel, that's got Acetobacter and other stuff in it because of the pellicle and its presence of oxygen and the beer drying out in the barrel some and stuff. So more like if you've got in a carboy and you keep it going. Racking off a certain amount of maybe the top sediment, kind of keeping it going. And then I like to just keep them in little, whether it's your little glass vials, anything like that, glass vials. Nalgenes, Nalgenes work great. So, but keeping cultures alive and in the liquid and not putting them in the fridge, just storing them out at room temperature until you're ready to use them again.
It's really helpful, I think, for a lot of people. It's one of those questions for home brewers as we experiment more with yeast and stuff like that.
Just a second.
Yeah. We're moving.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hello. Do you mind me? Hi, man. All right.
I still get more stuff in there.
Commercial break time.
Change of scenery.
Yeah.
It's Phil.
This was planned, but
T, say hi. He's just staring. He's like, "Ooh, computer, awesome." He's like, "Where are you going with the computer?"
I should have gotten the background music ready for the move. I knew it was coming.
Right. Turn on the light real quick.
All right. Look, you have a backdrop set up. Look at you.
I know. It's downstairs.
So
in the second part of our two-part conversation.
there it is. I'm telling you, I should have the little the little between two ferns music. So I guess there's so many things, and I'm looking at the time. There's so many things I could ask you that would be kind of detailed brewing questions, but I kind of want to talk about Crooked Stave a little bit more because, and then kind of wrap it up. I don't want to take up your whole night, but so when I was out in Denver earlier this year, you had I think 1, maybe 2 IPAs on tap.
Yeah.
So not Brettanomyces IPAs, clean IPAs. Is that a regular thing now? Is that happening?
It is. That's a regular thing, as well as our Pilsner, Von Pilsner, which is delicious. Yep.
Dedicated a tank to hold that. Well, I guess you're used to waiting on beer. So what's the difference? This is actually faster than most of your beer.
Yep. Yeah, and it's nice. We're still able to give it the time. I think it's like a 35-day or 42-day Pilsner. So it's great. We love it.
There you go.
Man, the flavor's awesome. It's been the most drank beer at Crooked Stave, far and away, is Von Pilsner.
Really?
Yeah, we pull it because we've got, since the brewery's separate from the tap room, we call it our friends and family bar, and it's our original tap room that we've completely rebuilt. I mean, it's like wood ceiling, everything, a huge 16-foot by 4-foot window that looks through into the foeder cellar, and we put on like 50-liter kegs of Von Pilsner in it and go through it. It's awesome. It was just because it was like going through so many sixtels.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, we should just start taking a 50-liter from the production and putting this on. And the IPAs as well. So yeah, I've played with the IPAs. The IPAs are all unfiltered IPAs, or the hazy IPAs. So in the beginning, to kind of turn people on to understand, like, this is not sour, this is not a Brettanomyces. We call it's sourless IPA is one of the IPAs.
There you go.
To poke fun at the fact that most of the brewing industry, understandably, is really kind of against the hazy IPAs because, yeah, you're taught, you're trained. It's like
Crystal clear.
any classically trained brewer, if there's such a thing. Yeah, this is like, what the hell is this piece of crap? And you're like, well, actually, if you're making them right, it's not the yeast that's in solution. There's all these stories about people collecting yeast and pushing it back into the tank. The precipitate, the haze, is polyphenols from the hops mostly. Our beer, before we dry hop it, is on the relatively bright side. We dry hop it, and that's what puts that haze back into it. Maybe we should add less hops. So playing around, we've got it's just hazy IPA, and then the other one's hazy not lazy IPA.
That's the other thing. People say, "Oh, it's just lazy brewing."
For some people, it might be.
Yeah,
each their own. Ours is getting anywhere from 10 to 12 days crashing. So a lot of breweries are producing beers in 10 to 12 days.
Yeah.
Our beer, after all the fermentation and dry hopping and everything, is being crashed for that long. So it takes a lot longer to produce than most would think.
How many days total is that?
28 days. It gets anywhere from 28 to 35 days. If we got the tank time, we'll give it to it.
For the IPA?
Yep.
Oh, Jesus. Well, people turn around in 14 days, man.
I know. 17 is a good turnaround on an IPA. If you're, in my opinion, if you're giving it the time it needs. So this is minimum's 28 days.
Is there? I mean, what are you doing differently? It's not a trade secret.
Just cold, at 0 degrees Celsius, crashing it, and then the additional time is that sometimes we'll transfer into the bright tank. So a lot of the lab and everything's been a huge attention to detail for these beers. Just having great shelf life on them. Making sure bright tank, the dissolved oxygen in it, below 20 ppb, the beer before it's transferring below 20 ppb, finish beer in, like just every time taking your standards higher and higher and that DO level lower and lower. Mm-hmm. So we'll get into the bright tank, and then sometimes if we don't need to go back into the bright tank for a little bit, it can stay in there and hold and crash even longer.
No effects on that, because that's what a lot of people say. I guess that's a myth. The longer the beer sits, a hoppy beer, the less hop and the less hop character you're gonna get. And I tried, I forgot which one it was, but man, I mean, the hops punch you in the face. I mean, they're there.
It's juicy.
It's juicy.
To make more puns on the hazy, unfiltered beers and calling them juicy and stuff. But yeah, it's awesome. I mean, we're going for citrus, floral, everything you'd want. So I mean, I'm trained to believe like filtering does not strip flavor or anything. That's absolutely not true. We've done plenty of trials and looking at it, but you can just add more hops and then filter and different things. This is just really continuing with what we do, which is unfiltered beers. The Von Pilter, it's a Keller Pils. It's unfiltered as well, as is the Kolsch. Kolsch in Germany is not filtered either. Traditional wasn't. That's traditional, really quick beer. So yeah, some fun beers that we're playing around with and doing. Pilsner's is beautiful. It's gorgeous. I love that beer so much.
Is there any plans to package that?
Say that again?
Any plans to package that beer in the future?
Yeah, I think it'd be awesome to put it into cans. Right now it's just draft and keeping it in draft and keeping it fresh. Everything applies to the standards. If you can keep your standards high, why not?
Yeah.
It's another way to be able to introduce people to Cricket Stave, but also show that, we're not just a one-trick pony. And the way I look at it is that in order to create the sour beers the way we do and to really make them with the effort and attention to detail that we do, I mean, making clean sour beer is the easy part. Clean sour beer. Making clean beer that's not sour is the easy part. Making sour beer is where, like, the real skill comes in. So, but you're turning people's heads by being like, you can make a clean, non-sour beer? Yeah, we've been doing it for a long time. So, of course, our beers, before they go into the foeders, before they go into barrels, are clean beers that some of them do not have Brettanomyces or bacteria in them at all. The ones that aren't supposed to, don't and haven't.
That's interesting.
So it's just continuing with that, dedicating fermentation space to it, for sure. And for our brewers, we find these beers to be creative and fun. You wouldn't think that. These are usually the beers that people in production and you always brew, but we brew Surette and VA, and Librette d'Or and Origins and Nightmare on Brett. So making these different one-off IPAs and making the Von Pilsner the Pilsner is just, it's a whole new kind of breadth for us. Now we're looking at like, okay, how can we make these have 4 months shelf life, 6 months shelf life, and seeing what we can do for them. That's not normal in the brewing industry. Most people just put a 3-month shelf life on their product.
Right. That's awesome.
Definitely. Right.
I mean, speaking of Nightmare on Brett, I have put that on my top beers of 2016 list. I freaking love that beer. I love it. Talking about a beer that's got so many different ranges of character in it. You get a lot of those wine notes in it. You get a lot of the fruit is there. It's not. I think I had a couple of them, but I think the one that made the list was the cherry one. So you get that nice cherry. You get the bourbon still there. The whiskey's still there. It's just such a great, phenomenal beer, and you can tell that attention to details there. So it's not just like let's throw a bunch of microbes and push the temp and we're going to package that, which is amazing. So it's nice to see that is going into the clean direction as well. I don't think we could have enough Pilsners. I love Pilsners. Spent some time in Prague drinking lots of Pilsners and just being mind blown every day. Every time I walked in a new pub and they had a different one on. Going forward for Crooked Stave, what are we looking at? We're starting to brew clean beer. We heard it here that we may start packaging clean beer. I guess if you had your way in 5 years, where would you see yourself? Where would you see the brewery? Are you hitting some of the goals that you hit for yourself in the beginning?
Yeah, definitely. 5 years, where we see. If the industry continues with the growth that it has had previously, we could do it. I would love to build a new brew house. Again, that kind of pulls together wineries and how beautiful and ideal settings they are. To have something the equivalent of that for a brewery would be beautiful. I would love that. We've been expanding a lot at where we are, mostly to be able to have more room instead of barrels stacked in such tight places, to be able to lower them and kind of set them out and to build units to give more room for packaging and space, more warehouse. So I think really having processes dialed in, for me, is a lot of the everyday production and everything we do. So having those dialed in. When it comes to beers, just knowing that things are continuing. You watch sometimes as breweries fall off a little bit, and sometimes that's just related to people's interest in them. So I hope that we can maintain that interest, stay creative. It's always been about being creative. That sometimes gets skewed and becomes different things. To me, I think it would be really interesting to put some of our Brett beers into cans. Whether that's creative or not, to each their own. But it's something different and moving in different places and continuing to kind of play around and see what's next and look at beers. So I think it's hard to forecast exactly what it is because things come and go and ebb and flow. So much. If you would have asked me a couple of years ago if I would have thought we'd be where we are with Crooked Stave or what we're doing, it's just not really. It just keeps coming, keeps changing.
I like how you said, when I ask you that, a lot of people go straight into, we want to be producing more volume, we want to be doing this. You just talk about process. And then walking into your beautiful brew house. I think that's pretty cool. It kind of ties the entire interview together, that whole romanticism behind what you are doing. It's really cool to see. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have coming for us in the future. Again, I might be kissing your ass a little bit, but I really love that every time I see a bottle of Crooked Stave on the shelf, I know it's something that's going to be different. It's going to challenge my palate a little bit, maybe. But it's always something that's well made. It's always something that's going to be balanced, and it's just you don't see that very often. And so,
what we strive for. So, good. It's good to hear.
Yeah, I think that again, I could go on chatting for hours, but I think that I've hit most of at least my kind of bullet points here on my timeline. I just want to say thanks again. This has been great. Hopefully, we can do something else in the future. Oh, actually, I do have one question. I'm a big fan of collaborations. I like seeing breweries come together. You were just doing a collaboration. Was it last week?
Yep.
But you guys don't do a ton of collaborations, right? I mean,
we don't. We've done miniature ones, I think, and sometimes they add up. And sometimes we don't do them as like a really big thing. It's kind of fun just getting together with friends and getting together with brewers. So,
is there any that have stood out to you as maybe, you get together with somebody to brew a beer and you go, holy shit, this guy or gal thinks like completely. I mean, whoa, their thought process on producing a beer is so incredibly unique. Has that ever happened to you that you've walked into that scenario?
I think some of the most, it happens in different ways. I get, with process, I get quite turned on to how other people's breweries look and how they are. And you're always looking at things and seeing what they've done and new ways you can do things. So that's really unique. And that can, the scope of that can be anywhere and everywhere. Larry Sidor at Crux has got a really impressive brewery. So that was a couple years ago in the summer brewing with him. But still the ultimate collaboration that I've done is, I want to say it's also the very first one that I ever did as well. Fairly positive about that. I'll have to think, but fairly positive. And that was when it was Sean Hill, Brad Clark from Jackie O's, and myself up at Hill Farmstead. And it was beautiful. It was on a snowy day. It was when Sean just had the really, really old brew house. So probably one that most people have never seen, because the brew house he's got now would actually be the third brew house. So this was the original. I think maybe Sean had been open for a year at that point or so. And it was phenomenal. So it was just snowing, barrels outside, the small little shed, garage where we were brewing this beer that, all of us brought cultures for it, different barrels. Brad brought these black walnuts from Ohio that we roasted the night before and were eaten during the day. Put them into the brew, and so it's just really like, I think maybe in my head it's quite romantic now.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, because the three of us this was late 2011, so over 5 years ago that we had done this. So that was like, it was really fascinating. I had this idea for instance, the unfiltered IPAs that I wanted to do from when I was brewing at Odell. And I didn't know, knew of Hetty Topper, knew the beer Sean was brewing and stuff, and trying his IPAs then, and was just like, the light bulb went off, because I was like, I didn't know anyone else had ever thought to do this. He's like, yeah, this is how we make IPA. And I was like, wow. I thought I was the only person who wanted to make an unfiltered IPA that, again, because it's frowned upon, brewing really had to be like that. So there were a lot of epiphanies that happened, I think, during that trip, and that still continued our real close friendship between the three of us. So
I'm surprised you didn't turn around and tell him, man, you're such a lazy brewer.
Lazy, not lazy. No, because they're delicious. You drink it and you have it, and they're not. It's not as hazy. The beers that are on the market now are a different type of hazy than what these are. So, yeah.
Yeah. There's something like when you dumped a pound of chalk into each glass when you served it. I love those.
You don't need to do that. It's okay.
That's juicier, man.
How'd you get it juicy? Put flour in it. Oh. Juice flour? Yep, juice flour.
Yeah, juice flour. It's made from oranges.
Oh, man, I'm going to write that down. That's going to be one of the next IPAs, juice flour. Orange juice flour.
Yeah, man, juice flour. Made from oranges.
Spell it like flour, like ground flour.
Can you send me a picture of that when you put it on the board?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, good. All right, on that note, you got your baby there, and I'm going to let you get back to him. And so,
great.
Thank you so much. Again, it could have gone for hours, but
this is awesome.
It was a blast, and see you soon, man.
Sounds great, man. Thanks so much.